What up, Fightful fam, and welcome to the sophomore episode of 1-2 Punch. Player 1, Shakiel Mahjouri. Player 2, Aaron, the Brain Bronsteter of TSN. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. Thank you. Bobby the Brain Heenan's estate might be getting in touch with you. Just saying.
Yeah, well, let's hope not. I did it in honor of him.
Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah, I'm always debating which way to go with these nicknames, but I felt like the Brain was suitable.
Okay,
you're smart,
fair
man.
enough.
And speaking of smarts, dude, you and TSN just put out a new feature on Hakeem Dawodu out of his fight at UFC 253. That thing is brilliant. Do you mind telling me how it got together?
Yeah, I mean, it's been probably over a year in the works. You know, I'm always looking for different athletes in the UFC that are Canadian, obviously, to showcase and tell their story. And Chuck Mindenhall, I believe it was, wrote a great story about Hakeem Dawodu. And I read it, and I went to our team and said, we've got to tell the story. Like, we've got to tell the story visually, because it's such a strong story and such a great story of resilience and rising up from a bad situation to become a high-level athlete like Hakeem Dawodu is. And that's the gist of it, really. I mean, he came from really bad, really bad conditions, and ended up becoming, a world-class Muay Thai practitioner and, of course, a UFC fighter. So it's on SportsCenter tonight. We'll air throughout the night, and it's also on our website, tsn.ca/UFC, if you want to go to that part of our website and check it out. Or you can just go on social media, and I'm sure you'll find it there also. Lots of places to find it, Shaq.
There we go. And yeah, Hakeem's got some great stories. I don't know if he's told you about the parole officer that kind of helped set him on a new course, but that's a very cool story too. Now, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, this is 1-2 Punch. What we do is we take the biggest news stories of the weeks and we assign the biggest winners and losers. Doesn't necessarily mean who won a fight this week. It just means, last week we had Conor McGregor's arrest as the big down. We had Michael Chandler's signing as the big up. So we're going to talk about the winners, the losers, and then we're going to draw some previews for UFC 253. And with that, I'm going to try and hit this animated intro. Bear with me. There we go. Please encourage you guys to interact with us on the chat. Still new to this, I will do my best to get to those. If you feel so inclined to help the channel grow, leave us a super chat. That would go a really long way, as well as a subscription. And a tap of that notification bell never hurts either. But enough of me trying to grow this channel. Let's do that the best way we can by getting to the content at hand. And Aaron, would you say that there is no bigger winner, not just this week, but perhaps in this whole COVID-19 era of the UFC than Khamzat Chimaev?
Well, I mean, it's hard to deny him. 3 wins, 87-1, I believe it is in total strikes when it comes to him versus his opponents. It's just pretty unbelievable what he's been able to do. And I've been, I guess, trying to make a case that he should be ranked in 2 divisions, and people keep poo-pooing that idea. But I stand by it. And while it is a controversial take for the most part, I can go into a lot of detail as to why I believe that he should be ranked. But it looks like one of my reasons is kind of a moot point now, as Dana White says he's going to be headlining a UFC fight night in Las Vegas against the ranked opponents. So my whole argument that he's not going to get any ranked guys to sign up to fight him seems to be going by the wayside. That being said, I mean, I asked my co-host on the TSN MMA show, cheap plug, Joe Valtellini, this question. I'm going to pose it to you. I know this is your show, and I apologize for taking it over.
No, it's our show, man. You're the co-host today.
Can you think of a single situation where a fighter has come into the UFC with this kind of momentum, 3 straight wins, really quick wins, really dominant wins, and gone on to being a less than average fighter or not a ranked fighter or not a championship caliber fighter? Because I can't come up with anybody that has had this big of an impact this early in their career in the way that he has, that has flamed out. And I don't know if anybody comes to mind, but I certainly have trouble coming up with one.
No, I think you may be right. I think the separation that people need to make is that this isn't just a hype machine propagated by the UFC. This isn't a Sage Northcutt or Paige Van Zandt where Dana White has earmarked them for success based off their regional performances or their looks or their personality, anything of the sort. Khamzat Chimaev came in with not a whole lot of fanfare to the mainstream audience, and it's through these first 3 performances that he's built this hype, and it's very deserved. I think people who, like myself, were a little apprehensive about heaping too much praise upon him prior to the Meerschaert fight. It's not because we were doubting him. It's just a matter of, there are levels to this game, and you don't know where people are at until they have been tested. And thus far, he has passed all his tests with flying colors, and he is definitely deserving of something, if not ranked, very close to ranked.
Yeah, I agree, and I can tell you who I think he should be ranked ahead of in the middleweight division, and who he should be ranked ahead
Tell
of
me.
in the welterweight division.
Who are
Well,
these
I
losers?
don't. Well,
Just
I
kidding.
mean, I don't want to cast him that way, and I certainly mean no disrespect, but Brad Tavares was the last time he won a fight in the UFC. Chimaev was 1-0 as a professional. Like he hasn't won a fight in a long time, and he's had tough opponents. He's had Israel Adesanya. He's had Edmund Shabazian. I get all that, but at the same time, like when guys don't win for a certain amount of years, I just don't understand why they can continue to occupy rankings. And then you look at what Chimaev's done. He hasn't beaten a ranked guy. I understand that. But I still think that, not that I think, I've spoken to odds makers, and I say, how many people in the top 15 would Chimaev be favored against? And in the middleweight division, they said everybody except for like Yoel Romero, Costa, and the champion, Israel Adesanya.
Wow.
And then in the welterweight division, everybody except for like Colby Covington, like basically the top guys. It's Burns, Covington, and like all the top guys, and Usman, of course. But and when you think of it that way, and you think that that's the perception of him, is that he can beat top 10 guys and that he'd be that big of a favorite against top 10 guys, you have to consider putting him in the rankings. I know that, again, he hasn't beaten a ranked guy. And then you look at welterweight. Robbie Lawler is still ranked. He's on like a losing skid. There's just a lot of examples of guys that are in the rankings that just haven't had a lot of success in recent years. And I think when it's been years without having that success, even though you have beaten guys in the past, people still need to consider that there are guys that are up and coming, big prospects. And the biggest issue that I have with the people that do the rankings is that they never take into account upside or how people perform. It's always like who they beat. Well, people don't always look good against people that are of a really high caliber.
Yeah.
But when you go in there and you beat 3 UFC caliber fighters, and people can argue with me and say Reece McKee's a lightweight, sure, fair. You can say John Phillips, he hasn't had a lot of success in the UFC, but Gerald Meerschaert is, he has the most submissions in middleweight history. He's a successful fighter in the UFC. For him to go out and do that after those last 2 performances within the span of 66 days, like, I just think that he's done enough to get that kind of attention and get that kind of ranking.
Now, you raised an interesting point, and I know that your stance on Twitter regarding Khamzat and the rankings gets a lot of flack. Would you say that your bigger issue is how the people who compile the rankings assess it, or is it more a matter of the consequences of not being ranked?
I think it's a bit of both, honestly.
Okay.
First of all, I hate the ranking system as a whole. I hate the idea of it. I think that it's a flawed premise. I think that the way they do it is flawed because there's conflict of interest. And then now they've made it less transparent. They made it an even less transparent process. They've added more panelists, which is good because it's good to have more voices in the room. But at the same time, like, I've always argued that if you want to do the rankings properly, you should do it based on like math. You should do it based on a numerical system like Fight Matrix does, because there's always people that are going to have biases when they're doing these rankings. And I admit that I would have biases if I did the rankings. It's nobody's perfect, right? Like, everybody has, different relationships with people in the sport. And as a journalist, sometimes you'll have a better relationship with someone than someone else. That's just how it goes. But I just think that the system as a whole has a lot of flaws, and I think the reason why it was implemented is basically for television. Like, it's like the NCAA tournament, how people have the ranking beside their name. It just looks nice on TV, and it does. And I commend the UFC for keeping that in mind. I just think that it's unfair to a lot of the fighters because it hurts them. The rankings, I think, have hurt the fighters more than it's helped the fighters in a lot of cases. And typically, the number 1 guy is not facing the champion anyways. They'll have I think it was the number 4 and number 5 guy that fought for the Bacon bantamweight title. Yeah. I mean, like, so what do the rankings really mean other than just being, like a show pony for the UFC?
Agreed. Quick shout out to Joseph Boza, who always contributes to these streams. He says Chimaev took the opportunity that was presented through COVID, fought 3 times, and now he could be someone to watch for in 2021. I mean, he's someone to watch for now. If anything, he could be fighting for a title in 2021. So you're absolutely right there. And a quick disclaimer, if you see, because I see this happen all the time with my fellow colleagues, if you ever see us looking around, it seems like we're unattentive. If I'm picking up this headset and putting it to my ear, it's a one-man operation here. So keep that in mind. But we're doing a great job anyway. And also, you kind of alluded to it. I made the loser joke. When we're talking about winners and losers on this show, it's not meant to be a slight on any athlete. It's just like they go in there and they win or lose a fight. Who had a great week? Who didn't? Don't be so sensitive, guys. It's okay. And I always forget to mention this off the top. We always have a drink of the week chosen by our guest. We're doing coffee this time. Thank you. Okay, what is tea to you? Because Sean Ross Sapp told me he wanted tea, which I'm not a tea
he's from the
drinker.
South.
He showed up with some like nice
tea.
sugary iced tea, which I would have been completely down for.
Yeah, Sean's from the South, so tea for them is sweet tea, which is basically like you take tea, you put it in a pitcher with ice and like a whole bag of sugar, and that's tea.
like a Snapple or something.
It is delightful. Like
I would love that. I would have loved that. I would have way preferred that to the hell that he put me through last week.
What did you drink? Like Earl Grey?
Yeah, just like Earl Grey. I hate tea.
Okay, well there you go.
Well,
next time get Sean to clarify.
Well, it's the tea is. Yeah, I told him it's the cross that I bear. Is drinking whatever my guest chooses. Now, are there any other winners that you wanted to highlight before we move on, unfortunately, to the losers end of this conversation?
Well, I've got to mention Mckenzie Dern. Mckenzie Dern has basically shattered all of the different stigmas that she's had going into the UFC. The cutting weight looks like it's no longer an issue. She looks great. The last couple of fights she's gotten on the scale, made weight, no problem. And then in that last fight, I don't know what Randa Marcos was thinking, but on the ground, Dern is not to be trifled with. And, she did lose to Amanda Hibash, but you look at how good Hibash is now. And it's quite clear that she's going to be a contender in this division. So I don't think I think that loss looked worse at the time than it does now. But I think that Dern still has a lot of upside in the UFC, and that she does have the chance to break into that championship mix sometime next year if she's able to win another fight or two.
Well, and she's one of those fighters personalities who has a lot going for them. She brings in the jiu-jitsu crowd. Unfortunately, as is the case with just about every female fighter, she brings in some of the gross parts of the audience, unfortunately. She's charismatic. People love the way she fights. People like to rag on her accent, which, some of these personally for her may not be things she wants focused on, but the reality is it seems like just in every aspect, whether it's her personality or her fighting, things people like, things people don't like, people want to talk about her, and that's something that she can parlay to a lot of success. That was a tremendous fight. Dude, what really stood out to me was not the grappling, because we know how good her grappling is. Like when I train jiu-jitsu, anytime we're talking about like breaking a grip on an arm bar, we say, okay, if this is a Thursday, if you're in a fight, just throw some hammer fists. You don't have to. This doesn't have to be a strict grappling match in a combat situation. Those hammer fists that she was hurling at Randa Marcos to try and separate her grip for the armbar defense were mean. Though, like, that girl can scrap. Mckenzie Dern can fight. And that actually reminds me of something else we can add to the losers section, but I want to go to Max El Kukui Holloway in the stream, who asks us, who's the front runner for Fighter of the Year? What's the timeline for Fighter of the Year? Because the World MMA Awards confuse me every time.
Well, yeah, their nomination pool was all over the place this year. Like, it felt like this sport moved so fast that, like, it felt like they were drawing from a pool from like the last 2 years. But for the Fighter of the Year for this year, I don't know. Who do you think? Who comes to mind? There just haven't been that many guys defending the title. Obviously, I think there's been a lot less activity at the very top. Like, Gilbert Burns is probably in the mix. You'd have to think
if he wins, without a doubt.
Even if he doesn't win, I think that getting to where he is, he's looks really good. Gaethje, he beat Tony Ferguson. We'll have to see how he does against Khabib. I think we still need to see a lot of fights before the end of the year before we can really decide on this.
Yeah, I think you have to put an asterisk, like you said, just because there's so much time left in the year. But I would say if Gaethje wins, I think it's going to for sure be him. I just think knocking off Khabib is a tremendous accomplishment in its own right. I think we can argue, we can say almost undisputably at this point, in terms of prospect of the year or rising star of the year, it's going to be Chimaev at this rate.
Mm-hmm. I don't see anybody else really that is in contention. But if Chimaev loses at some point this year, then it's hard to say this right now in September, when there's still 3 full months of MMA to come. A lot can happen.
Okay, if you had to just take a shot in the dark and say who by January would have been the Fighter of the Year, you can make up who's going to win fights from now till then. I'm going to say Justin Gaethje, because I'm as confident as I can be that he's going to beat Khabib. I know that's not a...
Yeah, I'm not super confident in that one. I think it's going to be a great fight, but I wouldn't be able to confidently say that anybody's going to beat Khabib. It's going to be awesome, though. Like, that's like if I had to choose one fight to watch before the end of the year, it's like a slam dunk. Like, there's not even a close second. But Yeah, I mean, Dominic Reyes, I mean, he's in the mix. I mean, he almost beat John Jones. A lot of people thought he did beat
That's
John
true.
Jones. And if he ends up emerging as the champion this weekend, you can certainly put him into the mix.
There's so many fights that I forget that happened this year. You know what I mean? That's why I always struggle with questions like this. Sean Ross Sapp was once describing it on his podcast over on the Pro Wrestling End. He was explaining to Jimmy Van how happy he is to have me take over the workload on the MMA end. And the way he described it was, imagine WrestleMania every week. Just 7 hours of content that you have to get through every weekend. To which I would say at least we don't have 3 hours of Raw, 2 hours of SmackDown, an hour of NXT, an hour of AEW Dynamite, plus a 5-hour pay-per-view every month. But
imagine being a national baseball writer. That would be a grind. 162 games a year with 30 teams or whatever it is.
I barely want to watch
baseball. That's a hard pass. Yeah, same with me. One game is enough for me.
Let's move on to, unfortunately, the losers this week. And I actually want to start with something that came to mind off of your Mckenzie Dern comments. I'm sorry, but Randa Marcos may have made the single biggest mistake in a fight that I have ever seen, for sure, of 2020. Terrific fighter, veteran, super savvy, but I just don't understand why she would rush into Mckenzie Dern's guard, dry, first round, fresh. What did you make of that situation?
I just don't know. She said she wasn't going to do it leading up to the fight, and she made a mistake. And it's the first time she's ever lost 2 in a row. She's been win-loss her whole career, except for that one draw
the
against
Roxanne
Rodriguez.
Modafferi effect. That's been her entire second UFC stint.
So this is her first losing streak. But I don't know what she was thinking. It's hard for me to even assess it, because it blows my mind that it happened in that fashion. It just seems like the one thing you wouldn't want to do was that, and she went and did that right off out the chute, right? But I mean, it is what it is. You're in there, and your mind kind of takes over.
Oh, yeah.
You're in autopilot, and stuff happens, right?
Well, it's like the Ed Herman thing. So many people were ragging on him for sort of wimping his way or acting his way through that body shot that was mistaken for a low blow. And I'm just thinking to myself, it clearly hurt. Why would you step back in there, compromise like that when you have time to recover?
First off, the ref makes a mistake. This is, to me, it's veteran savvy, honestly.
I agree.
People can rip on the guy.
I agree.
But this is a symptom of the system being win money and show money and win money. Because what is he gonna, for $75,000 on the line? He's gonna go to the ref and be like, "Hey, are you sure that was low, ref?" Yeah. No, he took advantage of a situation that was a mistake. The ref made a mistake and he capitalized, and that's fine. And that's what the fight game is. You capitalize on mistakes. Just so happened to be that it wasn't his opponent's mistake. And I'm sure that fight is going to get overturned, as it should. But at the same time, what else do you expect the guy to do? And like you said, he was hurt, and he took the 5 minutes to recover because he was given 5 minutes to recover. So
Agreed.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't like this subsect. That's the thing. I always find how often do you go on a YouTube video that you liked and leave a thumbs up or a comment? It's generally
never,
right? It's generally the haters who are the loudest portion of the fan base. So stuff like calling Dustin Poirier names for not taking the Tony fight for whatever money it was. It's just come on, dude. An example that came to mind recently is Robbie Lawler, Carlos Condit. Look at the irreversible damage that did to both men's careers. After that fight, they both took a steep downturn. You can't expect people to go in there and put their life, not only their health, but their career trajectory on the line if they don't think it's worth what they're being compensated. I don't know. I get frazzled by it. And then the other loser, unfortunately, Tyron Woodley. Rough Saturday for him. Put in a similar performance than he did against Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns, which is not saying a whole lot. And broke a rib for his efforts. He says he's not going to retire. A lot of people are calling for him to retire. Where do you sort of sit on that?
I don't think he should retire. I think that we need to see how he does against a guy who's a step down. I mean, if you lose to Usman, Burns, and Covington, the top 3 guys in the division, and you don't look good against them, most guys in the division wouldn't look good against them. That doesn't mean they should retire. If you took Jeff Neal and had him fight those guys, 3 guys in a row, Jeff Neal's somebody who we all know is a big up-and-comer, and he lost to all 3 of those guys.
Yeah.
Are people going to be calling for him to retire? Let's see what Woodley can do against a Neil Magny or somebody who's in the lower half of the top 15 before we write this guy off, because the guy was a champion 3 fights ago. I mean, 2 fights ago. I guess it's 3 fights ago now, but he was the champion. He had beaten like all the contenders put in front of him. He had multiple title defenses. So like, why are we putting this guy out to pasture now? Like, the guy still, I think, has gas left in the tank. It seemed like he was in a really good place going into this fight, but I just think that it's a little bit too early to make that determination about Woodley. And I know he lost basically 15 rounds in a row, 14 because that last round didn't come to completion. But basically he lost that round because he lost the fight in that round, in my opinion. So I mean, he's lost 15 rounds in a row, and it's not a good look for him. But at the same time, again, he's fighting the absolute best guys in the division, and I think you got to cut him some slack.
Yeah, so you mentioned someone like Neil Magny for him next. There are two names that I kind of threw out there. Michael Kiesa would be my preferred option of the two.
Yeah, that's a great option.
Yeah, number 8 gives him a very different look. And then if you're trying to put over a young star, possibly at Woodley's expense, I would really like to see Vicente Luque get a big fight. But I'm just
I think that Woodley would actually hang with Vicente Luque.
I
think that's a good matchup, and even the aforementioned Jeff Neal. Mm-hmm. If you want to put someone over, throw Jeff Neal to him and see what happens, right? Like, I guess we'll find out. And I mean, if you want to bring Ponzinibbio's name back into the mix, maybe you throw him against Ponzinibbio. Like, there are a lot of good options that lower half of the top 15 that I think Woodley would fare well against. And if he doesn't fare well against them, then farewell. That was really good, Shaq, I gotta say.
I appreciate it, man. I'm ready to be a father strictly off of my terrible dad jokes. I don't think I have any other qualities.
But that one was organic. It just kind of came. It flowed.
Yeah.
That's what happens. The more kids you have, now that I have 3 kids, the more dad joke juice I have. They just come out organically.
Dude, I can barely manage my workload with a smart puppy. I don't know how I would manage 3 children.
Well, try not to find out anytime soon. That's my advice.
Actually, that's one of the beauties of, like, when my girlfriend and I were picking out a puppy, she basically ended up getting everything I told her not to get. Hyper, smart, sheds.
That's like me. That's the 3 things that I don't want.
And the only upside, aside from the fact that, like, it's rewarding when you see them learning stuff, is I feel like it's tapered my girlfriend's expectations for children anytime soon. She's like, I never want to have this burden. I never want to have this commitment again.
Yeah, and having a puppy is like only like 6 months.
Yeah,
where they're like a horror. Yeah. And then like they calm down. But for like children, it's like a long time. And my son's 9 now, and now he's like pretty much like pretty independent and is good and is like a pleasure to have around. But the other kids, they're young and they do. My son was my 4-year-old son. My wife was like, "You shouldn't do that. It's dangerous." And then like he kept doing it and fell on his face today. Oh, so wow. Like even at 4 years, like you still have to deal with this kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I wish you luck. I will see you there one day. Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna touch on this so briefly because I just don't have the energy to. But man, I don't know what I want to call it, but I guess just like human decency took a major loss today. I put out that video with Rodney James Edgar. I know people did not like it, including some people in this chat right now. But I also know that the people who commented on and thumbed it down did not watch the interview before forming an opinion. And that's okay. I'm not here to tell anyone where they should lean politically, only to say that I think Colby Covington passed the line. And he's passed the line before. Listen, I love parts of Colby Covington's gimmick. I can't tell you how much I love that he tweets movie spoilers and pins it to the top of his profile. Like, that is chef's kiss funny. But he definitely went from, like MAGA hat, Trump loving Kobe to strictly racist Colby. He did it with the Brazilians back in the day, calling them filthy animals. He did it by calling Tyron Woodley a domestic terrorist sympathizer. And Dana White kind of brushed it off. I don't want to silence fighters, but I think there should be a line, and that's kind of all I'm going to say on it.
I didn't even think that one was as bad as what he said to Usman about
the
head of his tribe with a smoke
signal. People like there are tribes in Nigeria. Yes, there are, but that doesn't mean Kamaru's from one.
Well, yeah, but I think that kind of crosses the line. I mean, when you insult somebody based on their ethnicity and where they're from,
exactly.
What does that mean? I mean, you can call it what you want, but that's kind of what racism is, right? So, this is the thing that I said about Colby on the podcast this week. It's like he's kind of Frankenstein. like Dan Lambert and a lot of the guys at APT, Stevie Richards, a former pro wrestler, was his strength and conditioning coach.
Oh, really?
They kind of built, they kind of built this character, and they got him to embrace kind of being a wrestling heel. And he did that. But then eventually, like, they built Frankenstein. It got out of control, and they had to kick Frankenstein out of the lab. I mean, he was insulting people that were part of the team, and eventually Dan Lambert had to have an uncomfortable conversation to tell him that he's no longer welcome there. But Dan Lambert is part of who built Colby Covington into what he is. So, like, that's the best comparison I can make, is like he has become that gimmick to such a degree where there's no going back. If he were to come out, let's say he won the championship and said, now that I have the spotlight, now that I'm the champion, all of this stuff was just to get attention, and I'm sorry. I don't know if people would be that forgiving at this stage. I think there was a time where he could have done that if that was going to be the case, but I think he's doubled down to a point where he's now met the president. He's now become friends with the president and the president's kids. Like, I understand why he's embraced this more and more, because it's gotten in places where most people on this earth would never imagine being able to go and I have spoken to Colby, off the record or whatever, just behind the scenes, and he does believe in a lot of the stuff that he says. Like, he is a really strong supporter of, like, the police, the troops, and all of that, and he really does hold a strong value to that. That being said, I think that if you say that one side is Black Lives Matter and one side is the troops and the officers, you're not really seeing the entire canvas of what's going on in America. But I mean, again, I think that it's just kind of spiraled out of control to a point where there's kind of no going back now. And, the other issue is the UFC doesn't really have a real code of conduct. I've asked to see the code of conduct. I don't believe it exists. When I see it, I will report to everybody that it does in fact exist. I've asked people if it exists, and they say yes. But a code of conduct is usually made public.
Yeah. And
for whatever reason, this one is, and there seems to be no real code of conduct meeting. So until I see a code of conduct, I'm going to act under the assumption that there is, in fact, no code of conduct. So it's hard to really know what the UFC can do under these circumstances. And Dana White says, I'm not here to muzzle anybody. If somebody, Tyron Woodley went out and did a press conference and answered every question by saying Black Lives Matter, and the UFC didn't have an issue with that, even though his role is to promote a fight during that week, the athletes can do what they want as long as they fulfill their obligations according to the UFC. And a lot of people think that it's hypocritical. But at the same time, if you're going to allow people to say things on the other side of the table, and I think that there are a lot of people that disagree with whatever you want to call the left or whatever viewpoints, then, I guess you do have to take that for what it's worth. But I do think that there is a line, and that line was crossed over the weekend.
Yeah, and guys, for those listening who disagree, who have, if you haven't clicked off yet, it's okay to be exposed to ideas that you don't agree with. It doesn't mean it's not an attack on your character. In fact, it's a really good thing to take in perspectives that don't align with yours. If you have a retort, let us know in the comment section. I'm always happy to discuss.
If you support the troops, Rodney James Edgar was a member of the troops.
In fact, I think he's technically still active.
He's still an active member. He's still an active member of.
So that's the thing, right?
Yeah, of the U.S. military. So I mean, support the troops, support Rodney James Edgar and his First Amendment right to ask the questions that he wants to ask.
Yeah. And Brian Morey chimed in, said Colby shouldn't have to rely on shock value. I'm not a big fan, but he's good enough to not need that gimmick. Well, Colby did say that there was a time where he was basically on the chopping block because the UFC didn't like his personality or his style, and that's when he started crafting this. And that's the thing. There are elements of this that are so good, I don't think he needs to double down on the lowest common denominator of his gimmicks. Like, he's popular enough at this point that I don't think he needs to he doesn't need to cater to that really, really, really loud racist crowd. He can be a Trump supporter. I don't mind. He can run up on Dana White in a casino with a video camera out. Like, that is gripping content. That is, I'm sure Dana didn't like it, but that's really interesting footage. His run-ins at the buffet with Ali Abdelaziz and Kamaru Usman. Again, that's like the sort of pro wrestling drama that people love to see. I think he's creative enough and smart enough to do a better job of picking and choosing when to put this stuff out. Because he has done a lot of really clever stuff. That, like, spoiling Star Wars and pinning it is the pinnacle. That is so funny.
He did it with the Marvel movie.
He did it with the Marvel movies too. Yeah. Like, that's the thing. That's why I struggle, because I feel like I really want to like and support Colby Covington, but for me, there's a certain line where you just have to, you can't compromise on your principles or your morals for it. But that's where we are on that.
Hey, it's getting him the attention, right? I mean, the whole premise of it is that people talk about him, and he was on SportsCenter talking about LeBron James, and he was on the phone with the president. I mean, he went from being somebody that nobody really talked about to being what he is now. So, I mean, ultimately what he's doing has worked for him.
And it has also, what I appreciate is how media has used this as an opportunity to ask black fighters questions about how you feel about it and help sort of bring those voices up too, because Colby's is so loud and so visible right now. But anyways, that's much more political talk than I plan on getting into on this episode. Thank you guys for working through it with me, and let's move on to the UFC 253 preview as we begin to wrap up. I don't want to do fight predictions. I feel like there's enough of that content out there. So let's talk about some of the biggest potential storylines heading into and out of UFC 253. What happens if Israel Adesanya loses? He just signed with Puma. He's a major star. He's doing big traffic. How much of a stock does his profile take if he loses handedly?
Yeah, I mean, if he loses really badly and it's not good enough to earn him an immediate rematch, that's a problem. I mean, this is the thing about MMA, and Sean O'Malley has said this to me before. Sean O'Malley's gotten a lot of attention for all of the different things he does, outside the octagon. He says, the only way to grow my brand to where I want it to be is by winning. And, Conor McGregor would never have gotten to be where he is if he didn't win fights. All of these guys, the value of winning a fight and especially staying undefeated is so huge for his marketability, for how popular he is, for everything. Without winning, you can't get to that next level. And I mean, he was on the cover of the UFC game, but look at Masvidal. Masvidal was on the cover of the UFC game too. His stock right now is not where it was. He took a fight on short notice. It was a risky fight. And he says, the one fight that he wants is the rematch with Usman. He wants to prove that he was better than that. He wants a full camp. I get it, but his stock is not where it was at that time. It's still high, I think. I still think that he is a needle mover. But without winning, without consistently winning, your stock will not grow. And you can say the same about Costa. Costa can become a giant star if he wins. I actually think there's more on the line for him than there is for Israel, because Israel already kind of has the Puma sponsorship. He's already on the cover of UFC 4. He already has become a big star, and he did it really quickly. But if Paulo Costa wins, I mean, this is a good-looking guy. This is a guy whose English has gotten really good, and a guy whose fighting style is conducive to people watching him, just like Israel's is. But Israel had a rough go in the last fight, too, against Romero. I mentioned to Dana White that I thought his stock was down a little bit after that fight. Dana didn't agree with me, but Dana didn't like that fight. Yep. He was upset about that fight after the fact, and a lot of people were. So, he could have raised his stock even higher, but he didn't. Yeah. So I think that this is just such an important fight for both these guys, and their star power and star potential.
Yeah, I don't quite know. There's a point that he's starting to approach in terms of breaking into the mainstream. I have friends of friends who don't frequently watch fights and say, hey, boys, I want to get together this week. Adesanya's fighting. So he's close. If he goes out there and puts a great performance against Costa, he was on Hot Ones recently with Sean Evans. Shout out to Sean. Because there is Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey territory where you break into the mainstream and you can parlay that into stuff. Even if Conor loses, even if Conor never wins another fight again, he is a fixture of MMA. He is synonymous with the sport and the mainstream. So you can only hope Adesanya gets there before he loses for his own value. A quick shout out to Caleb, who says, I think Colby beats everyone and Usman 51 out of 100 times. Oh, and wow, this is so great. Thank you to PaddleRon6, just donated $5, our first ever super chat. So
hey, there you go, man.
I appreciate that very much. Costa, really quickly, because you mentioned it. I am not a particularly insecure person. I've got something. I always tell people, it's don't compare yourself to others. Others have things that they're great at. You have things that you're better at. Work with what you got. There is something about how handsome, built, and dangerous that Paulo Costa is that makes me feel inferior as a man. What a triple threat that dude is. It's kind of insane.
Both these guys are kind of like superheroes, right?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the other cool thing that nobody really talks about with this fight is like you've got like the kind of long, lanky, creative guy that does all kinds of cool stuff, and he's very charismatic.
Very.
He can talk. He's good. He's amazing at dancing. Like, he's got all of these different assets and attributes that he has, and then you got this guy that is like a superhero. He's a superhero and a supervillain. He's built up. He's got he's an attractive guy. He's somebody that moves forward with reckless abandon. He's somebody who's gotten really good at again communicating in the second language. Like both of these guys are essentially superheroes. That's kind of the cool thing about this fight is like when you look at like video game characters like from Mortal Kombat, like both these guys could be like Mortal Kombat characters. That's kind of the other really cool thing about this. Like you don't see a lot of championship fights where you have two people that kind of have those assets.
I'm sorry, I got caught off guard a little bit in the chat there. Max El Kukui Holloway writes, "Hey Shaq, how many times have you been compared to Yair Rodriguez?" I get Yair Rodriguez a lot. I get Renan Barão quite a bit, and I get
Renan Barão. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, and I get Pete Davidson, which I'm totally cool with because he almost married Ariana Grande. So
yeah,
fine with
me. Maybe there's hope for you yet.
Maybe. Not if my girlfriend has anything to say about it.
Maybe she won't. Maybe she'll be like, "Well, I kind of lost this one. Ariana Grande is interested in Shaq."
No. Allie's the best. Very quickly, because I want to get you out here soon. You got a spot to do on TSN Radio. Dominic Reyes versus Jan Blehovich. Clearly, right now, Reyes is sort of the A side of that. Let's say Jan Blehovich wins. Let's do a little creative matchmaking. How do you elevate Jan as a UFC star?
Well, I mean,
what do you lean on?
Yeah, I mean, the one advantage that he has that he's Polish, but I don't think you need to build him into a star. I think you just give him the next best contender. Like whoever's next in line, you give him like the winner of whatever Thiago Santos and Glover Teixeira, and you see what happens. I mean,
I guess my question is, what is his most star quality characteristic? Like if you were to try and elevate him in a WWE setting, what would you lean on?
Yeah, it's the Polish power.
Yeah, he does have.
Gotta go with the Polish power. He's got the Polish power.
Yeah.
And he also has that weird story about how he kisses a noose before he fights. What a weird story. I mean, I've never heard that superstition before.
In the Attitude Era, he'd be like walking out with a noose around his neck, and it'd be terrible.
I know about around his neck.
Yeah, it'd be like super tasteless. Yeah. Well,
but there's already the Hangman in the UFC. We've already got Dan Hooker, right? Yeah. So gimmick's kind of taken.
Maybe they can fight over it one day.
Yeah, so I don't know about that.
Yeah, open weight pride rules. Diego Sanchez, heading into his last fight, still had aspirations to be UFC champion. He has since shied away from those. He says he's kind of found closure in the fact that he won't fight for a title, but he wants to finish out these fights, and his career against Conor McGregor. That might be a bigger stretch than a world title fight.
It absolutely.
But how do you feel about the fact that Diego finally seems ready to wrap up his career?
I mean, it's probably about time. The weirdest thing about this card, I always point this out. The last Ultimate Fighter season, the winner is Juan Espino, who's competing on this card, and Diego Sanchez won the first Ultimate Fighter. And Espino is older than Diego Sanchez. Like that's the weirdest stat ever.
That's incredible.
Isn't that
Where do you get these stats from? Are you just like surfing?
I just noticed stuff. I do all the stats myself. I don't have a stats guy.
Yeah,
Any stat you see me put out there is me. I think about it. I look into it, and I find a lot of stats that are not interesting, and I don't put those out. Yeah.
But there are a lot.
Whenever I find one that is interesting, I'll put that out. But I mean, Diego, you can still make some fun fights with Diego. And one stat that I put out was Diego's been an underdog in 12 of his last 13 fights, and is 6-6 in those fights. So if you put money on Diego Sanchez every fight, you'd be like up a good amount of money.
Yeah.
But this one, I might be a little bit of a bridge too far. I mean, Jake Matthews is a good fighter. I don't know if Jake Matthews is like a minus 600 good fighter against Diego Sanchez. But
those are some big odds,
Yeah, I think we'll see. I mean, you can't write Diego Sanchez off because whenever people do that when he's an underdog, he always ends up winning, right? So let's see what happens. But the chances of Diego Sanchez fighting for a title are better than him fighting Conor McGregor.
Now, last thing on UFC 253, and then we'll begin to wrap up. Now, I know you're going to be a little bit biased here, as am I, because we got Hakeem Dawodu, just did a feature on him. He's Canadian. What do you think about the quality of the main card and outside of the main and co-main? Because I'm looking at it. no disrespect to the fighters, but from a casual point of view, you might not be able to name anyone outside of the main and co-main.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the worst one of the year, but in terms of pay-per-view main cards, but it's not great. I mean, I think that it could be better. But here's the thing: like when you're buying that pay-per-view, you're buying it for the top 2 fights,
Yes.
and I think you can make that case really for any pay-per-view. The problem is the thing that the UFC always used to pride itself on was that it's like not like boxing where like people just tune into the main event, sometimes co-main event, and not the rest of the card. And I still think the UFC has that going for it. But if you really want to keep that mantra, you should probably stack your main card. That being said, right now they're in an era where not every fighter is able to go. Like a lot of fighters are they want to fight under the absolute best circumstances. Like Michael Kiesa came out, I remember when all this started, and said like, hey, listen, I don't have the optimal circumstance or the optimal environment for training, so I'm not going to fight. And I think that's fair. But there are probably a lot of other fighters that are doing that, and they can only have so many fights at a time. They were still playing catch up with their schedule for the 3 or 4 weeks or whatever it was that they lost in between. And they still are. I mean, it looks like there's going to be a card every week until the end of the year.
Bro, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
I think the worst time to take a full-time position.
Yeah, and you've got contenders who are coming back in November to boast. Yeah. But I mean, I love it. I honestly, I don't want a Saturday off. I look forward to nothing more than than watching the event on Saturday night.
That's
honestly,
beautiful.
I love fight week. I mean, every week is fight week, but I love like the flow of fight week, and it's awesome. I mean, hey, listen, I've got 3 kids and I'm married. So like my Saturday nights aren't the same as like a Saturday night of somebody who's in university or somebody who's single or whatever.
25 years old, still trying to live my life.
Exactly. Well, I had my first, I got married at 25. I didn't have my first kid at 25, but so I mean like my Saturday night is like, that's the thing I look forward to.
Yeah,
like the fact that I do this for a living, like I will never complain about it. Like people complain about it and say, oh, it's too much and we don't get time off and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I just love it. It's awesome.
Yeah. I find for me, I'm going to get there because I pride myself very hard on like my work ethic to have a work-life balance. Like I've zeroed in on my formula. For me, I think once my friends start kind of moving forward with their lives a little bit more, it'll be easier for me because like you said, you got the family, your Saturdays are in a sense kind of your night off from those responsibilities. Whereas for me, my girlfriend and I have been together for approaching 7 years, both have full-time jobs, and so we are live together, and so we're in that structure more than a lot of my friends are who are just now getting jobs, just graduated from 4 to 8 year programs. And so I look forward to retreating into fight week more as I get older. Last thing before I let you go, and I am springing this on you, I should have given you a heads up, but I like having stuff sprung on me. So for those of you who have, thank you, Joseph, Max, Kayla, Brian, everyone who's stuck with us through the show, you will now be rewarded because I'm going to flip a coin and the loser has to tell an preferably embarrassing story, preferably related to their time in the industry. It can be in your personal life too. It doesn't have to be embarrassing. It can be interesting, but let's give these folks a show. And
I'm gotta think of a good one here, but okay.
I know. I will let you call it. Would you like heads or tails?
I'll call heads.
All right. All right.
Oh, well, now I don't need to think of a good one.
Now you don't need to think of a good.
You're on the clock.
2 weeks in a row this has happened to me. Last time, you were actually there. I don't know if you remember this. Last week I told them about my first ever scrum was at UFC Ottawa. That's the first time you and I met. And how I asked Derek Brunson about his cheerleading background at the scrum. And he gave me this look as if he didn't know what I was talking about. And everyone in media was like, who is this dumb kid who just messed up? But it turns out he does have a cheerleading background. Anywho, this week's story. UFC.
Everyone else is dumb.
Everyone else is dumb. Thank you. UFC 241. I was interviewing Yoel Romero. And I was the first one to get to him on media day. And I had a microphone, but I didn't have a foam for it, right? To like kind of, for those of you unaware, it just kind of helps cut through some of the pops and stuff. So I took a different microphone foam that didn't fit to like hang loosely over it. And I hand him the microphone and he just kind of tilts it over. It falls off. He picks it up and he starts making fun of me. He's like, what is this? What is this rookie cheap mic setup? And I look over to him and I say, you might remember he won a huge lawsuit over a supplement situation and it was worth millions. And so I looked at him and I said, hey, well, I'm not the one who just won millions in a lawsuit. So if you want to help out your boy, I'd appreciate it. And he looks at me with those intense Yoel Romero eyes, and he goes, I pissed my pants. I crapped them. I soiled them, whatever you want to call it. I have never feared for my life more than when Yoel Romero didn't think I was funny.
Yeah, that's bad. That's pretty bad.
That was bad. I died.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's not my most embarrassing, but it's probably the single most scariest moment of my life.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
There we go.
I had a fun one with Romero where I asked him a question. He answered it. It was like an 8-minute answer to one question. I put that out there. That was after the Izzy fight.
That's me with every question I ever asked Vitor Belfort. Now, to be fair, he gives me terrific answers every time. But there's just those guys. Better than the ones who don't talk at all, though, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I loved it because he had the translator, too. So I was like holding the mic, and then I had to go over to the translator, back to him, back to the translator, back to him. It was like 8 minutes. My arm hurt afterwards.
I love it. I love it. Guys, that is all the time we have for today. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the sophomore episode of 1-2 Punch, for engaging with us on the chat, for donating to the super chat. A reminder, go check out the TSN feature on Hakeem Dawodu. Aaron Bronsteter put that together along with some of the other fine folks over at TSN. As always, if you could please hit the subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and leave a like on this video. It goes such a long way to helping the channel grow. And I always forget my really dumb outro, but stay tuned for everything Fightful and oh so delightful. It's absolutely garbage, but
not great.
Fightful